Apple at 50 years. Dream machines, a lost legacy, and a pathway back. Free your Mac. What if one of the most successful companies in history quietly began taking back some of the very features and freedoms that drew people to it in the first place? And what if, for once, its users actually had a way to respond collectively? What I'm about to share isn't just a manifesto or a memorial to what this company is or once was. It's a mirror and a memorandum for what could come next for Apple.
Apple is no longer was or jobs. It might be time.
It's a big day. But we do have one more thing. This is a day that's been years in the making, one that I've really been looking forward to.
So welcome, and thank you for being here. This is the first official audio podcast episode for Free Your Mac, and it's going to be full of surprises. And considering the April 1st timing of this release, I want to say up front, what I'm building up to in this episode might sound unbelievable at first, but in the full context of what follows, and upon Apple's 50th anniversary today, I've never been more serious. And to understand why this moment matters, let's go back to where it all began. Apple Computer Company was founded on April 1st, 1976. Yes, April Fool's Day in a garage in Los Altos, California. And what followed was anything but a joke, with the release of the Apple II helping to ignite the personal computer revolution by bringing computing into homes, schools, and small businesses. No small task for the late 70s and early 80s. Over the next 5 decades, Apple would do more than build innovative products. It would fashion design an integrated ecosystem of devices and software that work seamlessly together. And in doing so, redefine how people create, work, and interact with technology, while also playing a defining role in the evolution of tech culture. 50 years into Apple's story, the dream is still there. Apple continues to produce some of the most elegant and powerful devices in the world, machines that remain a joy to use for billions of users. But over the past decade, something began to shift. The philosophy that once defined Apple began to fade until think different gradually began to feel like think corporate. A company once defined by rebels and creators now increasingly appears shaped by services, subscriptions, even financial products like Apple Pay, alongside its famous hardware, now famously non-upgradable, and all layered within that same tightly integrated ecosystem, now increasingly designed to keep users engaged and dependent. And to be clear, the issue is not that Apple has diversified and expanded. Many tech companies have. The issue is what Apple deprioritized along the way, namely respect for user control, autonomy, and for how users retain value in their devices over time, or discard them sooner than ever, with a pattern of restricting or unnecessarily complicating the ability to upgrade, update, repair, resell your device, or even recover your own data. And once you start looking through this lens, a pattern begins to emerge, a pattern out of step with vital key principles that built the company and earned lasting trust. In the early days, Steve Jobs described the personal computer as a bicycle for the mind, a tool designed to amplify human creativity and intelligence. The Macintosh, introduced in 1984, embodied that idea. A computer built not for corporations, but for individuals, small business owners, students, those who saw the new frontier and wanted to participate if possible. And yes, the artists, musicians, writers, designers, the early adopters, the people Apple would later celebrate in its Think Different campaign as the crazy ones, the rebels, the square pegs in the round holes. These were the people Apple claimed to stand with, and for many years, it did. Despite its closed architecture, Apple's commitment to the user experience was unmatched, welcoming, human, and, compared to other tech companies at the time, widely seen as something different, something cool. But soon after Apple grew into one of the most successful and valuable companies in history, a different set of priorities began to take shape. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually through a series of small, rationalized decisions. Changes that, at the time, didn't seem all that significant. One of the earliest shifts came just months after the death of Steve Jobs, when a new MacBook Pro design introduced permanently soldered RAM and glued-in batteries to enable thinner designs. And with the striking debut of this model's new Retina display drawing most of the attention, concerns about non-upgradable memory and long-term servicing largely went unnoticed. And the Retina MacBook Pro would go on to become one of Apple's most celebrated models. A few years later, as MacBook designs pushed even thinner, the shift went further. Personal storage, once a removable user-controlled component, was now permanently soldered to the logic board. First with the entry-level 12-inch MacBook, and then, more significantly, with the flagship MacBook Pro. And with the later removal of internal data recovery pathways, users are now left with no practical way to recover their own data if the device fails. And this is where the implications became much harder to ignore. With memory and storage now governed by soldered design and fixed at purchase, custom Mac configurations, essential for professionals, now required these MacBook logic boards to be built to order and priced at steep premiums for extra RAM or bigger drives, often referred to as the Apple tax. Yet, just recently, Apple began allowing base models to be aggressively discounted through retail channels like Amazon to expand market share, of course, and introduce these new buyers to Apple's array of, yes, services and subscriptions, a whole ecosystem of consumer choices. But the discounts just widened the price gap between these off-the-shelf models, more affordable than ever before, and the really sucks to be you, full-price custom configurations. And you better make sure you upsell yourself and order the maximum RAM or storage that you might need down the road because that's how Apple does things now. Adding insult to injury, for power users especially, AppleCare Plus extended warranties started undergoing changes, quietly shifting away from transferable, transparent prepaid coverage towards subscription-style plans tied to an Apple account. And as more devices became locked into these non-transferable subscriptions, the out-of-warranty Macs, as a result, became less attractive, and potential resale value declines substantially, considering how expensive Macs are to repair, thereby greatly weakening the independent market for pre-owned Macs, and funneling more devices into Apple's trade-in program, often at sub-market pricing. Great for Apple, and great for people who just buy a device and they're going to use it until it's obsolete, or they hand it on down or recycle it. And the changes didn't stop with the hardware or warranty. Under CEO Tim Cook's leadership, supply chains tightened masterfully, maximizing efficiency and profit. But as hardware became more integrated and less modular, owners of custom-configured MacBooks have at times faced repair timelines stretching several days, if not sometimes multiple weeks, for issues that once took 1 to 3 days. On the iPhone, the 2017 BatteryGate scandal exposed Apple slowing down older devices via iOS updates to mitigate issues with aging batteries. However, the lack of disclosure and resulting confusion, which in some cases spurred unnecessary repairs or new device purchases, led to class action lawsuits and widespread distrust. More recently, inconsistent iOS update policies, sometimes requiring users to accept major iOS upgrades as the only pathway to receive security updates. Let me read that again. Requiring users to accept major iOS version upgrades with new features and possible bugs and things that might slow down their machine, their device, as the only pathway to continue receiving security updates. This has raised concern about user autonomy, device stability, and the usable lifespan of older devices when effectively pushed onto newer software. This is a pattern I've been investigating, commenting upon, and referring to as UpdateGate, raising deeper questions about control over the operating system software that runs on devices that we purchase and we own. And it wasn't just users affected by such policies. For developers, the App Store model, with Apple commanding commissions of up to 30%, became the focus of a global legal battle when Epic Games challenged Apple's control over app distribution. Although Apple largely prevailed, the court found parts of its rules anti-competitive and ordered changes. And Apple? It simply introduced new fees and restrictions that preserved its revenue model and was later found in contempt of court, having willfully violated the injunction. And here's some late-breaking information. As I am recording this episode today, the news has just broken that Apple has indeed canceled the Mac Pro desktop, which, starting at $7,000 retail, was the last remaining Mac that was still somewhat upgradable and allowed for real internal expansion. The last Mac where you could add storage inside the machine is gone. So not only is this a 50th anniversary, but also a requiem for a dream machine. And the list could go on. None of these changes happened overnight. Each one on its own could be explained, defended, justified. In fact, soldered RAM, despite little benefit when it launched back in 2012, later turned out to be integral to Apple Silicon's unified memory in late 2020. However, soldered storage comparatively offers no substantial improvement for users and still remains a stain upon the MacBook Pro name. Taken all together, this list of changes represents something much larger than the sum of its parts. It reveals a pattern, a shift, not just in design, but of increasing control, away from user freedom and towards platform-managed dependency. And once you see this pattern, it becomes difficult to unsee, especially as the ecosystem quietly reshapes how and how often we pay. Apple once warned us of such control. In its iconic 1984 Super Bowl commercial announcing the first Macintosh, Apple positioned itself as the rebel, standing against a monolithic technological authority. For decades, many believed Apple represented the heroic promise of a better future. But today, in some ways, the corporation has begun to resemble the very structure it once challenged. And so on January 24th of 2024, upon the 40th anniversary of the first Mac, for my first Free Your Mac YouTube video, I revisited that moment, recreating the 1984 George Orwell-inspired commercial as a parody, including Big Brother delivering his speech wearing a yet-to-be-released Vision Pro face computer, ominous on that big screen, demonstrating how Apple may indeed be flipping the script in more ways than one. And yet, this is not a story about failure. Apple's success is undeniable. Its products remain extraordinary. The issue is not success, but continuity. So the question becomes, what would it actually take for Apple to restore some aspect of that continuity? This is where Free Your Mac comes in, a project focused on documenting these issues, amplifying real user experiences, and advocating for practical solutions. And from that work emerges the Apple Trust and Values Initiative, a framework that grew out of the hopes and frustrations of hundreds of users I've worked with, many wishing they could just jump ship and switch to PC, if not for the Apple ecosystem. And so with feedback.apple.com being a one-way street limited to 250 characters, no real way to register any opinion that matters, And Apple's customer relations department, increasingly difficult or impossible to reach by customers, an alternative portal was needed. So looking at the most persistent complaints, the ones that had been echoing for years, I organized them into 3 common sense proposals. 3 important, specific, achievable changes presented in a way that Apple cannot easily ignore. 1. Restore value, specifically sabotaged resale value. Allow AppleCare Plus warranty coverage to be transferable to any new designated owner of the device by enabling subscription transfers and or restoring prepaid AppleCare options, aligning extended warranties with the hardware again, not just the Apple account. Number 2, restore autonomy. Offer premium MacBook Pro or Mac Studio configurations that feature modular, user-upgradable, swappable, bootable storage, a professional option that is all the more important now with the discontinued Mac Pro. It's time for Apple to revisit removable storage sensibilities circa 2015, but powered by today's Apple Silicon, with a high-end modular portable for those who need absolute control and flexibility as data needs expand. Number 3, restore longevity. Allow iPhone and iPad dual-track iOS updates to continue for a full year between new version releases, enabling users to receive security updates without being forced onto potentially unstable new versions. Remove the gate in UpdateGate and give users the choice of when to move forward with optional upgrades. Taken together, these proposals form something powerful but simple, a return to balance between Apple's offerings and its users' needs. These are not radical demands. They are targeted corrections, practical steps that would respect ownership, preserve value, and extend the usable life of Apple devices, and in ways that align naturally with Apple's environmental goals. Because taken together, these course corrections would not only improve the user experience, but also reduce unnecessary and premature turnover of devices and help curb the growing problem of e-waste, which makes this conversation even more important. And as Apple reaches its 50th year, at a time when technology is becoming increasingly shaped by AI, more automated, centralized, and more distant, our data and user autonomy grow more precious and precarious as the sole human link to the hardware that we purchase. Maintaining a tangible, autonomic human connection to the tools we rely on has never mattered more. The questions are not whether these modest changes are necessary or possible. It is whether they can be clearly and consistently communicated to Apple, not as isolated complaints, but as coordinated user priorities. And for the first time in years, there is a clear way to do exactly that. In this spirit, and starting on May 1st, the Apple Trust and Values Initiative presents an opportunity for consumers to open a meaningful dialogue with the company, a way for great factions of Apple users to speak with a collective voice in the form of something anyone can participate in. The Apple Be Cool Again Petition Drive. Announced today and launching on May 1st on change.org and on freeyourmac.org. A group of 3 independent propositions, to each of which any Apple user can add their signature and support. Restore value, restore autonomy, restore longevity to AppleCare Plus warranty, MacBook Pro storage, and iPhone security. 3 particular concessions, minor course corrections that would make Apple cool again. And this is where the message becomes very simple as the title. Because this effort is not asking Apple to become something new, but to recover something it once understood. That technology should feel empowering, generous, and yes, cool. Modular storage was cool. Transferable warranties were cool. Longer update flexibility that respects user choice would be cool. These are not fringe demands or anti-Apple complaints. They are the kinds of features that once made Apple feel more human and more aligned with the people who believed in it. And most importantly, all this is not just wishful thinking. There are already signs that Apple may be receptive to such proposals and capable of such course correction. The late 2021 MacBook Pro marked a notable shift, reintroducing MagSafe and acknowledging the needs of professional users by restoring the HDMI and SD card slot. The hardware leadership behind that transition, John Ternus, is now widely seen as a potential future CEO. If that direction continues, it raises an important possibility that Apple may already be rediscovering parts of what it once stood for. And more currently, the new MacBook Neo model has not only shipped with a user-replaceable battery, but has significantly lowered the price barriers to entry, $599 or $499 with educational discount, bringing more users into the ecosystem than ever before. But accessibility alone is not enough. It must be paired with respect for power users and those who have been there all along, carrying the ecosystem forward for decades. Hundreds of millions of longtime Apple users, creators, developers, professionals. In many ways, they are the living legacy of the company. And at 50 years, this is a moment not just to celebrate Apple's history, but to reflect upon its responsibilities to its users, to its ecosystem, to the ideals that once set it apart. Apple still builds dream machines. Now it has an opportunity to restore the legacy that made those dreams possible. And so this is where you come in. If you believe in that vision, I invite you to take part in the Apple Be Cool Again petition drive as we announce it today on Apple's anniversary, and it goes live on May Day. The pre-launch campaign updates are available now on freeyourmac.org as a grassroots, coordinated effort to give users a voice in shaping the future of Apple's ecosystem. And whether this grows slowly or quickly, every voice matters. And even if the issues outlined in these 3 particular petitions don't exactly affect you, they're most certainly affecting someone just like you. So please sign with them in mind, because with Apple's estimated 2.5 billion active Apple devices worldwide in 2026, the ecosystem is massive. And it is the user's responsibility to speak up on the record when things might need a bit of course correction. The problem is there's not really that capability to speak up. Since 2011, there was a successful petition for the GPU failures in the MacBook Pro at the time. Gaining well over 30,000, almost 40,000 signatures was enough of a blip for Apple to address the problem. So there is known precedent for petitions and Apple, restoring trust and value for the people who built their lives around these tools. And for those who need more convincing, please check my YouTube channel for episodes on planned obsolescence, semi-disposable MacBooks, the UpdateGate controversy, and stay tuned for my AppleCare expose. Long live Apple on this its anniversary. Long live user autonomy. These need not be mutually exclusive. With Free Your Mac introducing a new hopeful mindset for Apple advocacy. And if you listened this far, I'd like to convey my deepest thanks, along with years of thanks to my thousands of Mac-using clients, and of course, appreciation to Apple for my own 35 years of Mac experiences, the fits and starts and exuberance of technological evolution, and especially the freedom my first Mac laptop afforded me. When signing off on YouTube, I often say, free your Mac and your mind will follow. And please tell your Mac friends to follow Free Your Mac. And I hope that perhaps this little manifesto today is the moment that a movement of sorts starts to grow into something far beyond me. And I can go back to making music on my Mac. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing. I am EKG Electro Greg, freeyourmac.org. Until next time, over and out.